I'm here to relate something about the origin story of SCGB, which I was involved in. I got roped into it by Jerry Fishbach, who's sitting here. I don't know if you remember that, Jerry. In the summer of 2011, I got the first heads up that Jim and Marilyn were thinking about substantially increasing the programs of the foundation and putting significant new resources into it, and that there would be a meeting to discuss possible big idea projects to tackle. And Jerry said, I'd like for you to consider coming to this meeting and presenting something on neuroscience. And I said, well, I'll be happy to help out any way I can, of course. And then in early 2012, I got an email from Jim Simons out of the blue inviting me to attend this conference, which was going to be at a bucolic place called Buttermilk Falls, a little bit upstate from New York City. And I wrote back to Jim an email accepting his invitation that started with some pleasantries, but I want you to focus on what's in the red box. This was my first pitch to Jim and my first sort of trying to say what this could become. And I said, our old paradigm of looking at nerve cell function one neuron at a time has served us better than we had any right to expect. Imagine studying a supercomputer one transistor at a time. But we must find more sophisticated conceptual approaches to dealing with populations of cells, dynamical systems, ? Whose signals are becoming increasingly easy to measure. Mathematics and new theories of computation are crucial for this effort. I will definitely make this argument at the meeting in New York. And Jim wrote back to me essentially instantaneously, Bill, I couldn't agree with you more on this point, and we will be delighted to hear your promotion of these ideas at the meeting. I even have a name for the approach, the global brain. This is the first mention of the global brain in the history of SCGB. It was already in the man's head. He was far ahead of me. I think much study should be given to the huge ensemble of data generatable from EEG or MEG signals at as fine a temporal resolution as possible. I even think it possible that signals, even memories, could be encoded in the welter of electromagnetic activity continually generated within the brain, some parts of which may have evolved to act as receivers. This was a favorite idea of his, that it's electromagnetic receivers in the brain. This is perhaps far-fetched, and it was, but it does seem clear that the sort of global activity to which you refer needs to be studied, and that sophisticated mathematical analyses will be required. Looking forward, Jim. So I was very positively impressed by this email and said, all right, maybe something good could come. So 6 months later, after that email exchange, was the Buttermilk Falls meeting and the plane ride, the fateful plane ride. So I was planning to come to Buttermilk Falls. Jim wrote me and said, you know, I'm going to be in Berkeley for my granddaughter's graduation. I think I have that right, Marilyn. I think it was the granddaughter's graduation. And why don't you just fly back to New York with me for the Buttermilk Falls? I'll be going directly there. And I think Steve Quake was on the plane as well. And that was a memorable plane ride. I was wondering, what the hell am I going to do talking to this very, imposing and distinguished person for 5 hours on the plane ride? But it turned out to be really comfortable, even exhilarating. Exhilarating in part because of Jim's mind and his voracious intellect and his deep interest in all sorts of topics. We talked about Stony Brook. We both had Stony Brook in common. That's where I started my career. And the exhilaration may have been fueled by the dense nicotine concentration that was, imagine a small jet, right? And Jim's filling that plane with smoke. And but it was a really fun ride, and we got to Buttermilk Falls and had this meeting. The concept of the meeting is that various people who were involved in big ideas that Jim and the foundation had sort of selected they wanted to hear about made a pitch, and we just sat there all day, made pitches. Marilyn was there. She and Jim sat up at the front of the room for the whole thing. And I made a pitch on dynamical systems and population analyses and argued that it could be a paradigm change for our field. And it seemed to be received pretty well in the discussion. And Eric Lander, bless his heart, who has nothing to do with neuroscience, right, said at the end of my presentation, he said, well, if you can get a paradigm change in a field for only $16 million, that seemed like a pretty good deal. So I don't know where the 16 million came from. Probably I'm just doing what Jerry told me to do, I'm guessing. So I was heartened to get this volume soon after that. This was a compilation of all the presentations at the meeting. And on the first page is a photo of all the people at the meeting and a personal note from Jim saying, "It was great getting to know you on the plane and in the meeting, which we thought a great success. I'm glad we're following up, Jim and Marilyn." So this was some sign, at least, we were on the right track here. So I was also then asked to write a white paper, which I did in combination with Jerry, and I think Terry Sinowski may have made some comments on it too. But it was the first kind of formal written down proposal for what would become SCGB. This is one paragraph from that sort of captures the vision around June of 2012. From a bottom-up perspective, we wish to know how neural computations within small circuits provide building blocks for synthetic operations at higher levels. From a top-down perspective, we seek insight into how high-level circuitry orchestrates the activity of low-level mechanisms in pursuit of larger behavioral goals. In short, we aim for an integrated understanding of nervous system function that takes mechanism seriously while avoiding a dull reductionism that mistakes a parts list for understanding. And, you know, that reads pretty well to me 10 or 12 years later. During the fall, we were asked to revise that. They wanted it longer, they wanted the vision fleshed out more, and they wanted a semi-serious budget for what it would cost to get this done. And that's when Tony and Larry and I went to work expanding, and Tony and Larry brought much more eloquence and elegance to the proposal. But there's one paragraph in that version that was really fully fleshed by the end of 2012. I like this paragraph. Our overall goal is to shift the paradigm for neurophysiology from static single-cell studies to a dynamic population-level viewpoint. In addition to developing and applying new methodologies, we intend to proselytize and educate, promoting a switch of approach that will make our former selves obsolete and open the way for a new class of investigations and discoveries. This is pretty ambitious here. I don't think I was responsible for that sentence. That's Tony or Abbott, and I suspect rather the former, but we'll see. This is an example of the revolution starting to eat its own young, right? Eat itself. It was heady days. So in June of 2013 is that first exploratory global brain meeting at the foundation that David alluded to, where we first came together and, used that Movshan, Abbott, Newsome paper, white paper as sort of a basis for discussion. And that went well, but we got some criticism from the foundation, some feedback, and said we need to do this again in a few months, and here's some changes you need to make. And the big criticism that I remember is they thought we were too clubby, that this was a little club of people who was, wanted to have a little thing among themselves, which is true, actually. We never wanted to become an NIH studies section, although we did, in fact, end up becoming there. So we had a second meeting in September of 2013 where Jim's participating and being his usual forceful self, asking really probing questions, important questions, and our goals and the methods we're going to use to get to the goals and how we're going to organize ourselves and what governance is going to be like. And shortly after the end of that meeting, I got a letter from David Tank, an email from David saying that Jim had approved. He'd given the go-ahead for the SCGB. And from then, David was head of the thing, a really great choice to head this effort up over the last 10 years. David, in his one persona, holds all the threads that were really important for this effort, and it was a great choice. And after that, David's records and recollections are much more accurate than mine. I was asked to just comment briefly on the relationship between SCGB and the NIH Brain Initiative, because these dates here should look familiar, especially into 2013. Obama in his State of Union address in early 2013 really announced this mysterious to us neuroscientists, mysterious effort at a national level in neuroscience. And in April, between December and June, so when I got a call from Francis Collins asking me to co-chair this thing with Corey Bargman, and there are a couple of people who were actively involved in SCGB who were on the brain committee, including David and David Anderson. I don't know if David's here or not, but he will be. Okay. So there was cross-fertilization of ideas, but obviously the goals of the Brain Initiative were much broader for the entire field, whereas SCGB was really focused on this question of how do we see and detect and work with interior brain states where you're going to necessarily not be able to get good clues about the brain states from single neurons, recording them even sequentially, but you had to look at the coordinated activity of populations of neurons. And that, I think SCG maintained its focus there. But the NIH people, I remember at our first actual annual meeting, Jim Knott and a couple of other people from NIH asked to come and sit in, and because they had heard the buzz and it was generating interest and excitement around, and NIH came down to see what was happening here so they could kind of learn from it, and we welcomed them, and I think that's good. I think, I echo Dave's thing. I think that the central goal of accomplishing this change in paradigm SCGB has accomplished, and it was not easy. There was always some resistance to it. This is one that the people in the Theory Center at Columbia, I showed this slide during one of my talks there about 10 years ago. But the very first dynamical systems paper from my lab received acerbic reviews, especially from reviewer 2 here. We were able to deal with the other ones, but this reviewer 2 is really the old guard, and this was typical of study sections and people who reviewed papers at the time. And he or she says, the main difficulty faced by the authors regarding this aim is their approach. While their dynamical systems analysis may be a valuable tool, applying it to a population of neurons for which we know very little about their discharge properties is a major limitation that seems to elude the authors. And then the really pedantic part comes out. The authors are poised to make a valuable contribution by reporting a detailed analysis of the discharge properties of this neural population. What they really mean is single cells. Such a report is, that's my emphasis there, prerequisite to the study that is presented in this manuscript. So it's prerequisites. This was the mentality of many people in the field at the time. And this didn't bother me that much. It was a minor irritant more than anything else. But for a young person starting out who's enthusiastic about these kinds of population ideas, this can be devastating, even stopping. So I think we did a great job of this, and the revolution continues. I was going to say a little bit about the Brain Initiative, but I'm not going to since I'm out of time. And I'll just say thanks again to Jim and Marilyn, who've sort of been at our sides every step of the way, always with questions, but always with support and encouragement. And of course, we miss Jim so deeply in his recent passing, and his memory and his influence is permeated throughout this entire effort and this entire organization. And just one last thing before I sit down and shut up. I will sit down and shut up. We lost an incredibly valued member of our community who was there from the beginning, in the middle of this effort. But again, I feel like his influence is with us still. And in recalling that how much we miss Jim and his input, I also just want to point out what an intellectual and practical debt we owe to Krishna Shenoy, who was one of the sort of early leaders in this kind of science. And Krishna, we miss you also.